The first ever live-action adaptation of Avatar: The Last Airbender is here, finally. It's been a couple years since it was announced, and I was starting to think the whole thing was scrapped at one point. But after what I've been led to believe, as a former Game of Thrones fan myself, I had high expectations for this show, but I was disappointed by many aspects of it. For instance, there's quite a bit of exposition dumping in the beginning, a few questionable plot changes. I remember at some point getting a little bit bored, and it's not what I was expecting. However, I thought the casting was great, the visuals were spectacular, and more importantly, my Cabbage! He did it! He said the thing! So, from the get-go, the first scene takes us to the past, before the events of the show. Personally, I had no problem with this change. I think it expanded on the world and its history, especially for new viewers who may not have watched the animated series, if they exist. It showed the Fire Nation's ruthless and relentless pursuit of war from the start. It made them seem more intimidating and overpowering. We get to see that they're evil instead of just being told that they suddenly attacked. Speaking of showing and not telling, the show just kind of forgets this concept and begins exposition dumping on us from the jump. I have nothing against exposition, but in the first episode, this is where the show is supposed to grab my attention, get me hooked, and get me excited to watch more, even if they had a lot of exposition later on. But that did not happen. I also think too much of it makes the characters, well, characterless. They just say who they are, what they want, or how they feel, instead of letting their actions and expressions show it. For instance, when Aang learned he was the Avatar, he talked to Appa for a long time about his feelings instead of, oh, I don't know, acting it out. This also created another issue with this scene related to the changes in the plot, which I'll get into in a minute. Next character issue, Ozai. Why is he being shown to us? Ozai in the animated show was hidden for a reason. He's an inconspicuous, inauspicious villain meant to propagate fear, not just for the characters on the show, but the audience as well. It gave him a godlike presence, an inhuman being, creating a fear of the unknown type vibe. That is completely taken away in this show. Ozai is just your typical villainous, tyrannical maniac hell-bent on world domination. Of course he was like this in the animated show, but because of his concealed presence, there was a much more powerful and ominous aura around his character for at least 2 seasons. I'm not getting that with this Ozai. I was also not convinced by Azula's story. I get that they were trying to make her relationship with Ozai more interesting, but it seemed unnatural and rushed, like they just added Azula for the sake of it. Personally, I didn't think it was necessary. It wasn't bad per se, I just didn't really care for it. So yeah, I enjoyed the casting. I think the actors did a good job portraying their characters. Katara was fine, and Azula was impressive, even if she was kind of unnecessary. Sokka managed to get a few chuckles out of me, although there was absolutely no reason his sexism needed to be toned down. It's important for the show to have this because it shows how he grows and learns from his mistakes. Just because misogyny and sexism are offensive doesn't mean we should pretend it doesn't exist. In addition, didn't they claim the show was going to appeal to Game of Thrones fans? Okay, so we could handle violence, gore, war, sex crimes, and obscene levels of sexism and misogyny, but God forbid you show us kiddie levels of sexism.
Well, now you've stepped over the line.
Likewise, how exactly was this supposed to appeal to Game of Thrones fans? The violence is pretty tame in comparison. So is the overall plot, characters, and dialogue. What am I missing? Someone fill me in, please. I'm slow. Also, I'm not one to judge child actors, so Aang was pretty good too. But Zuko was my favorite. No matter what anyone says, Dallas Liu is Zuko, just like Iñaki Godoy is Luffy. He was amazing to me every time he was on screen. I was in awe. I felt like I really was watching Avatar in real life. My second favorite was Uncle Iroh, of course. I had high expectations for this one, and he was awesome. I was not disappointed. They both captured the essence of Avatar in this live action. And lastly, but not least, we got Mr. Cabbage Man. We won! My Now, on to the plot changes. I mentioned earlier that I wasn't too thrilled with the scene after Aang is told he's the Avatar and he goes on a long monologue to Appa about how he feels about it instead of showing us. The animated series demonstrated how he reacted to the news by having him run away on purpose, but got caught in a storm and vanished for 100 years. The live action had him tell us how he felt and then go out for some air. Then he got caught in the storm that trapped him for 100 years. I think this made his decision less substantial. He was a kid. Running away made sense for him. It also explained his guilt when he came back and why he desperately wanted to help people on his journey. He wanted to fix his mistake and do some good. Him going out for some air did not have the same effect, in my opinion. Sure, you could say he has survivor's guilt, but again, he was a child, suddenly saddled with the responsibility to save the world. Him running away was realistic, and the show removed that aspect. Also, I did not like how they told Aang he was the last airbender when he woke up in the first episode. I think Aang should have found out by himself and felt the weight of his choice and his role as the Avatar. Aang entered the Avatar state when he saw his friends were dead because he was flooded with all kinds of emotions, disbelief, grief, and guilt all hitting him at once. He couldn't handle it. Telling him earlier made his reaction less impactful because while watching I was like, but they already told you everything. I was also disappointed by the absence of Katara's gesture in this scene. In the animated show, she held Aang's hand while he was in the Avatar state. That was a powerful moment. It showed her bravery and compassion as she reached out to the Avatar when he was at his most dangerous and vulnerable. You could even say she connected with Aang's soul. This was an important moment for their relationship going forward. I have nothing against certain changes being made when adapting to a live action. However, I think that certain notes that make up the essence of the story shouldn't be changed. All that aside, the show was acceptable. I wouldn't say it was egregious or bad. Sure, there were a few changes I wasn't particularly a fan of, but it was watchable. Unlike a certain movie that doesn't exist, the show was visually stunning, a feast for the eyes if I say so myself. I enjoyed it, and I might watch it again. Maybe I'll develop an even deeper appreciation for it. I just realized that we didn't even see Aang attempt to learn waterbending. Not once.
What was the reason?